the on-site visit to Colombia with the objective of verifying the different forms of violence that impact human rights with an ethnic, racial, and gender approach. With me, Roberta Clark, in my capacity as chair of the commission, the delegation was composed of the second vice chair and rapporteur for Colombia, Commissioner Jose Luis Caballero, Commissioner Stuardo Ralón, Commissioner Arif Bulcan, Commissioner Andre Pochak, and Commissioner Gloria Demise. We were also accompanied by the Executive Secretary, Tanya Renon, and the Deputy Executive Secretary, Maria Claudia Polido, the Chief of Staff, Patricia Colchero, and specialists from the Executive Secretariat, as well as the Special Rapporteurs for Freedom of Expression, Pedro Vaca, and the Special Rapporteur on Economic, Social, Cultural, and Environmental Rights, Javier Palumo. From April 15th to April 19th, we were in Bogotá and in the departments of Antioquia, Cauca, Choco, La Guajira, Magdalena, Nariño, Putumayo, and Valle del Cauca. We held more than 50 meetings with different public authorities and control agencies, and we wish to highlight at this moment the open and constructive dialogue held with high-level government authorities. We also had more than 45 spaces for listening to representatives of civil society, activists, social and community leaders, members of the academia, trade unions and business associations, as well as leaders of various political parties. We had the opportunity to listen to victims of the different forms of violence that prevail in Colombia, who shared with us their pain, their yearning for justice and reparation, as well as the impact of the insecurity on their daily lives. During the visit, we also toured the territorial training and reincorporation area, Pondores, visited the prisons of IACHR, Modelo, and Buen Pastor, and learned about the reality of the Puente Nayero humanitarian area in the Buenaventura and Agua Blanca district in Cali, as well as the Nicoclí pier in the Darien region. We welcome the Colombian state's openness to international scrutiny and its commitment to human rights. We take this opportunity to thank the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in Colombia, the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees, the Externado University of Colombia, the Ombudsman's Office, and especially MAP of the OAS for their support in carrying out our visit. We also acknowledge, of course, civil society organizations, victims, and all those who provided information to us. The Commission's last visit to Colombia took place in 2012, so 12 years ago, and it focused on the human rights situation during the armed conflict. Since then, there have been several working visits to the country, including the 2018 visit to address the situation of human rights defenders and people with social leadership. We also visited in 2021 in the framework of the national strike. Colombia is a country characterized by extreme inequality and also by poverty, with a weak or non-existent state presence in territories where there is strong presence of non-state armed groups. The Commission emphasizes that Colombian society is now immersed in the complex process of social, political, and economic transformation, in which historical practices rooted in a culture of structural, racist, patriarchal, and classist discrimination are being renewed and reviewed. From a holistic view of human rights, the 2016 peace agreement marked a path towards this transformation, centered on the abandonment of weapons, an agenda of access to land, transitional justice, and the substitution of illegal economies. The Commission values efforts that seek to ensure human security through effective access to rights, and also actions taken to realize a more just and inclusive society. I now give the floor to my colleague, Jose Luis Caballero, Rapporteur for Colombia. He's also the Rapporteur for Independence of Justice Actors, as well as human rights defenders and the rapporteur for the rights of children, and he will continue this presentation.
Thank you very much. Históricamente, la discriminación se ha manifestado en la negación
structural racism. We have excluded indigenous peoples as well as Rome, black communities, Afro-Colombian, racials and or rooted and palenqueras from the palenques. It has created a hierarchy of gender which subordinates teenagers, women, girls, and LGBTI people. These kinds of discrimination are intensified in its intersection with economic dimensions which have strengthened the process of social and political exclusion. The access to water, to food, and other economic rights, as well as social and cultural and environmental, are still a debt towards peoples, the poorest of people, and the communities in faraway areas. Inequality and discrimination are at the roots of the armed conflict in Colombia. And more recently, in the massive manifestations in 2019, 2020, and 2021, the state only has a marginal presence in several rural territories which require social services, safety, access to education, and basic infrastructures. Without access to productive lands or economic resources, many people are doomed to unemployment, accepting precarious salaries to be able to just live. And that situation is used for the recruitment of girls, boys, and teenagers. All this joined to the fact that there is an insufficient peace accord application has helped the non-existence of the government and the increase of illegal mining, illegal groups, of violence in Colombia. The reconfiguration of the armed conflict still makes a hole in the basis of the usage and enjoyment of human rights in Colombia, and that is reflected in the alarming number of murders, threats, and hostigation, harassment, as well as stigmatization, among others, against signers of the peace accord, defenders and social leaders, defenders of human rights, and community leaders, more especially the people participating in the claim for land and environment. We also document big facts of violence against journalists. Violence of gender is critical for women, men, and teenagers. LGBT people, in particular, indigenous, Afro-descendants, peasants, and people with disability, in people who do not have mobility, still have sexual and reproductive violence in the areas controlled by armed groups. Even though there is a huge impact of conflicts over Afro-descendant and Indian women, they are still excluded from the egalitarian participation in peace processes as well as governance. They have less access to land, education, and productive resources. In the territories inhabited mainly by ethnic populations, we have phenomena as murders, threats to leaders, males and females, recruitment of boys and girls as teenagers, and an increase of extortion and kidnapping. Besides, the territorial control of armed groups has generated situations of populations in resistance, confinement, and internal displacement, and its magnitude configures a humanitarian crisis and makes them lose their culture and risks their survival. This, in a massive flow of Haitian, Venezuelan, and Ecuadorian people, as well as extra regional countries, which increase the risk of people traffic and other contemporary ways of slavery. The state has made an improvement with protection policies as well as mobility programs. Nevertheless, the deficit of protection is huge, and there are humanitarian urgent needs which should be attended on behalf of public institutions. These facts are perpetuated due to a systematic impunity, which supposes that investigations are not carried out with the due diligence, and that when there are sentences, people responsible are not sanctioned. On the other hand, the Inter-American Commission cited in prisons where, even though the willpower of humanizing the treatment of penitentiary population, there are persistent conditions of an unacceptable imprisonment. The state has to work with the judiciary delays in the rendering of anticipated deliverance, the infrastructure, which is inadequate, the lack of water, and feed or food of bad quality, a deficient health attention. People interviewed in the different regions of the country stated about the anguish and the pain, the despair in this climate of violence, as well as the compulsory survival surrounded by the illegal groups and very lingering government. We have an express will in the application of the peace accord, the creation of a jurisdiction, an agricultural jurisdiction, as well as the issuance of the 2022 to 2026 development plan and a policy against drugs. We hope these are enough guarantees for these populations. And besides, we now have total peace process which searches or aims at the dismantlement of these criminal groups, subjugating them to justice with environmental safeguards. The many different voices heard by the Inter-American Commission coincide in the need of consolidating peace to achieve a consolidation of the country. Pandemics and the weak presence or total absence on behalf of the state, the increase of armed groups, and the control over communities and illegal economies are some of the factors which explain this continuum of violence I have just described. The institutional design for the implementation of the peace accord has become fragmented within the different entities of the national government. We observe miscoordination in three levels among the national institutions, with specific action plans which do not dialogue among them, among the national agencies and the municipal and department authorities, them not receiving the resources, and the communities which are claiming for an effective participation. What we look for is for the prioritization of this dialogue along with this peace accord, and that what is defined effectively will be executed. In matters of judicial transitional justice, we require the system of integral and non repetition. The Commission of Truth faced the causes and consequences of conflict and formulated recommendations for social transformation as well as institutional transformation included in the National Development Plan 2022 till 2026. And the special jurisdiction for peace, even though it has made an effort in putting victims in the center of procedures, it persists with challenges for the dialogic truth in participation of victims as well as the implementation of the territorial foci appropriate for them. On the other hand, within the country, there's a political polarization manifested in overacting positions. It shows a different economic model and a focus of citizen safety and security, as well as a risk of instrumentalization of justice and control entities with political purposes. That phenomenon can only be overcome with a wide public debate and the look for consensus. The purpose of achieving peace and democracy requires guarantees for public deliverance in an open and plural way, which may include the voices of territories and the different expressions politically and socially.
However, the Commission warns a very degraded political debate because of misinformation and a sustained climate of violence against journalists and broadcasters. Besides, there is a harsh environment against press and communication media at a national, departmental, and local level. On the other hand, journalists in the territories reported that they received pressure by armed groups participating in the peace dialogues. The long armed conflict has consolidated a culture which normalizes violence. It is appropriate to find lasting and concrete solutions from a territorial approach which allows to advance in an expedited way in the effective access to rights, starting from the recognition of a multicultural, ethnical, equal, and diverse society. Lastly, the Commission restates its support to all state policies which aim achieving peace through a participatory dialogue and through the respect to human rights. In this sense, the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights first calls the states to develop redistributive policies which may guarantee the full access to rights and decreases inequality, as well as to strengthen its comprehensive presence across the territory. Second, encourages the executive branch to meet its international obligations or duties of protecting life and integrity of people across the national territory, guaranteeing security of communities, especially in those territories where ceasefires or bilateral ceasefires have been decreed, and aligning the new negotiations with armed groups to the established path in the peace accord of 2016. Third, calls the Congress to give priority to a constructive dialogue and consensus which allows the approval of necessary laws for implementing the peace accord, specifically the reform to the victims law. Fourth, encourages the General Attorney's Office of the nation and the judicial power to comply with its obligation of investigating, prosecuting, and sanctioning material and electoral actors responsible for serious violations of human rights. Fifth, encourages to strengthen coordination between national, departmental, and municipality administrations, guaranteeing effective participation of communities, particularly to assure viability of productive projects, development of infrastructure, access to water, construction of roads, as well as the offer of real choices, options for all the people, especially for youth. Lastly, the Commission trusts that the state and society in its whole can achieve social and political accords, agreements which trigger necessary transformations to achieve peace and guarantee the application, exercise of human rights in Colombia. Thank you very much, Country Rapporteur, Commissioner José Luis Caballero. Thank you very much, President Clark. I will open the space for questions from the press. If you agree, we can have 4 or 5 rounds of 4 questions each. Who would like to start? One, two, three, four. If you agree, please state your name and the media you are representing so that we can register you. Thank you all. Rafael Aristizabal from W Radio. My question is related to the first paragraph that you were reading in the conclusion where you say that you called the state to guarantee redistributive policies as well as a comprehensive access in areas where there have been marginalization. But from the specific point of redistributive policies, currently there are some reforms that are being approved in Colombia, constitution of pensions, health reforms. You had meetings with different institutions and communities. How do you think these reforms will apply in a country? Do you consider they are good or bad? Good afternoon, Miguel Estupiñán hacia el umbral. Do you receive complaints from the peace community of San José de Apartado? And how is the process going with the peace community of San José de Apartado in the IACHR? How is the process doing? Good afternoon. Here, Nicolás Rojas from Noticias Caracol. My question is addressed to the constituent process, constitutional process that Gustavo Petro is proposing. Do you consider, from what you heard from the communities, that it is justifiable? Good afternoon, Cristina Navarro from Caracol Radio. My question is addressed to all the journey, the tour that you did in different territories of the country. Do you believe the total peace policy is joining, is affecting the peace accords in 2016, and what is your recommendation to the Colombian state? Thank you very much. Javier Palomo will answer one of the questions. The first one is about the status of legislative initiatives. Thank you very much, Secretary. Thank you to the press present here. Situation regarding the existence of different kinds of redistributive policies which materialize in different kinds of reforms is varied. Some of the policies, as the health policy, has an impact in redistributive uh, policy, but definitely it's about public policies to guarantee rights in different countries. It is clear that countries, Colombia has a high uh, privacy in at the moment of mentioning what the design of public policy will be to guarantee the right to health in their territories. By principle, it's not about being for or against these reforms, but the Commission values all the initiatives, legislative, um, regulatory reforms, which aim at progressing in the guarantee of rights. But there are some other reforms that are more clearly addressed to redistribution, more labor related, especially when they include aspects related to the collective negotiation. There are reforms which clearly impact the distribution of wealth. Those reforms are essentially important in countries which have inequality, structural, permanent, consistent situations on time, as it is the case of Colombia, as it has been said at the respective time. The same thing, the tax reforms. Tax reforms which avoid to be regressive. They're progressive, tax base which avoids indirect taxes and that tries to generate profit tax or income tax are mainly relevant in the redistributive perspective, which are important in countries like Colombia. Under this visit, I've gone through different regions in which there are some entrepreneurships which are millionaires. However, communities around are being victims of pollution, contamination, and they're not receiving the benefits they should be receiving. There be tax structures that allow this redistribution or distribution through taxes that make it possible for financing good quality public utilities. Thank you. The second question will be in charge of Commissioner Andrea Bouchard. Good afternoon. To answer the question of Hacia el Umbral Media, the Inter-American Commission did meet with the peace community of San Jose de Apartado. It has been assisting for many years the violent situation the community is going through. The community is protected by precautionary measures recently extended, and there is an ongoing request to the Inter-American Commission. The Commission expresses its concern because of violence that members of the communities are going through, and it encourages communities of the state to protect these communities that are victims of armed groups that are harassing them. We know that the national entities have visited them recently and have committed to adopt a set of measures. From the Inter-American Commission, we'll be following up the adoption of those protective measures towards those communities. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Nicolas from Caracol. Where's Nicolas? Constitutional process, or yes, it's on the sovereignty of each state to estimate the social, political, legal, juridical conditions to start a path of such a large encompassing as a constitutional reform or a constitutional change. So what I recommend the state is that before any initiative in this sense, a new constitution it's not as new as it has to respect the international accords or commitments that states have. That means the idea of a totally innovative constitutional process is not valuable after the emerging of international law, human international rights, and the commitments in terms of rights that the states have signed and which Colombia has at a very great respect, and we estimate it so. But the discussion is up to the domestic appreciations from the states. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Caballero. Now we'll give the floor to Commissioner Arif Bulken for the answer to Christina.
Tell you is that over the past 3 days, my colleagues and I visited a number of cities across Colombia, and our almost unanimous experience was of communities ravaged by violence. And ravaged by violence because of the non-implementation or the weak implementation of the peace accords. And what you've seen is, what they all said was that in the gaps that were left by the FARC, other illegal armed groups came in, and what that meant was that they have been constantly terrorized since then. These communities are affected by kidnappings, forced disappearances, extortion, and the worst of it, their children are being forcibly recruited. And so for us, it's very clear that there can be no peace, no lasting peace in this region without dialogue. And as they themselves have said, what they need is multilateral dialogue, so dialogue among all the parties, and they need as well development. So this peace process has to go forward for these communities to exist and to flourish.
Gracias, comisionado Vulcan. Vamos a una segunda ronda de preguntas. El compañero.
Colleague will finish this round of questions. Hi, good afternoon. William Parra from Noticiero CMA. You're talking about a humanitarian crisis. I would like to know if that statement is in the whole country in which there is a humanitarian crisis, and especially related to what? And you are also mentioning the high index of impunity, especially in investigations and responsibilities to intellectual authors in the murderings to peace signers, community leaders, and defenders of human rights. Good afternoon, Nicolás Méndez from Revista Semana. I would like to ask about some encounters in terms of politics that you had this week. For instance, with one sector of Pacto Histórico, who reported some kind of harassment, persecution by control entities against some of its leaders, and also from Centro Democrático, the former president and some other Congress members, because of a case against them at the attorney's office. So I would like maybe you tell us about these meetings that you had. Thank you. Ivan Cruz from RTVC Noticias. I would like to ask you about the causes in the delay of implementing the peace accords. Does it have to do with what was done by the previous government, by Duque government? Have you made any comparisons? Good afternoon, Carl Rodriguez from RCN Radio and La FM. Important something that you are taking into account and is the lack of viability right now with the press, with the media. What recommendations are you giving the states to avoid murderings, transparency of the media, of press, and else? And if it is possible, today the meeting with the president Gustavo Petro was foreseen. He sent his delegate as the chancellor. And what does it mean for you that the president didn't attend to the meeting? We will start with Commissioner Andrea Puchart or with Commissioner Caballero. Commissioner Andrea Puchart for William's question. Good afternoon. Regarding humanitarian crisis, the Commission warns about an evident humanitarian crisis in the region of Necoclí regarding migratory flows which are attempting to cross the irregular path through the Darien Gap. There is a humanitarian crisis situation. People are starving, people are not having health, people are suffering violence, extortions, violations. And what the Inter-American Commission is warning is an absence of the states. They are international cooperation institutions, but the state is not present nationally or at a departmental level or at a municipality level providing humanitarian aid in that place. That's why we're demanding the state to provide that urgent help. Now, in regards to the question of impunity for murderings to signers of a peace agreement, impunity for murderings to defenders of human rights and activists, yes, Colombia is facing a historical context of impunity That's why the recommendations, great part of recommendations, are addressed to the General Attorney's Office of the Nation and the judicial system as a whole to face it. They are specialized institutions, as for instance, specialized attorneys or prosecutors units to investigate crimes against the signers of a peace agreement. We would like to ask the new attorney, general attorney, to empower that specialized unit, investigation unit.
I'd like Commissioner Caballero, may I give the floor to President Clark to speak about impunity in
our meetings with women's organizations, human rights defenders, and affected communities that gender-based violence is a big part of the fact pattern of conflict in the affected territories. And that gender-based violence, a lot of it includes sexual assaults, rapes, sexual exploitation, trafficking, including of girls and children. Much of that violence goes underreported, perhaps because in those territories there's not a robust or even any presence of police or courts. So there is you start off with the inability to report, and there's also fear of reporting because reporting also brings reprisal. So you start off with underreporting, and then when you enter the justice system, you see an attrition between the number of reports laid and prosecutions undertaken. So we know that there's a dramatic decrease between reports and prosecutions and convictions. This first demonstrates impunity. And the problem with impunity, apart from the perpetrators going unpunished and unaccountable, it also creates or contributes to the normalization of violence against women, girls, and children. And so this is something that that I think the women's organizations and human rights defenders are very concerned about. And we also note, in fact, that the Constitutional Court has commented on the need for alacrity in the investigation and prosecution and attention to gender-based violence and harms perpetrated against human rights defenders.
Gracias. Para la pregunta de Nicolás, de Revista Semana, le doy.
I would answer this question by saying that Commission has in very high esteem the value of democracy, dialogue, and hearing all the political voices. I would say that it would be difficult to encourage to this dialogue in Congress if we do not hear the voices represented in the same. Against all the political forces, the historical pact, the Democratic Center, it was a position in opening to different points of view. This enriches democracy and informs about the mosaic impositions and allows for us to, in the sense of having a dialogue, which has to flow to achieve the agreements. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. About the causes regarding the delay in the peace accords, a question about Ivan. Mr. Volkan, see
communities is that there has been virtually the absence of the state in the context of this increasing and continuing violence. And so our clear message is that there has to be peace and there has to be consensus in the society, and there's no value in the continued fragmentation, the continued finger pointing. What there needs to be is consensus among the parties and consensus in the society that there needs to be implementation of the peace accords, so that the communities can live safely and in peace. Yes.
Gracias, Comisionado Volkan. You want to answer the fourth or?
to Commissioner Caballero. Carla, where are you? Okay, great. Thank you. That one. We had a great visit of high level in the receptivity on behalf of the state. State gave us a whole equipment, a whole infrastructure to be able to move. They opened the dialogue doors, the international supervision, as it should be. We never had the smallest message or signal that could discourage our purpose of meeting all the political voices, the victims, the society, the most vulnerable and poor people. On the other hand, on the contrary, we had open doors. President Petro, on the 27th of January of 2023, invited us, the International Commission, with we accepted very happily after having been absent for 12 years in an in loco visit. We had today a very important visit with the highest levels of the executive power, having the control of these topics, giving answers to the Commission, accepting the recommendations we previously shared with them. So the visit was totally complete in that sense, and we thank the Colombian state was so available for the supervision visit of the Inter-American Council.
Seen, as well as our recommendations that we've shared with you today. And we were assured by the representatives, the high-level representatives at our meeting this morning, that they will read that report without defensiveness, and also they will be following the recommendations.
Gracias, comisionados. Vamos a la tercera ronda de preguntas. Compañero 1, 2.
By Carla, and Pedro is going to answer. Thank you, the executive, and for the opportunity of sharing in this visit to be able to receive with regard to the conditions of press in the country. Maybe the biggest main character, we were able to speak with journalists in regions where there are conflicts currently, and we had a very confusing situation since they received pressures of the different armed actors with the purpose of publishing a speech, and that gives that makes a trap for them, because if they publish it, that would mean having issues with the counterpart, with the other illegal group. And if they do not do it, they also face consequences. And this overlaps with the fact that some of these illegal groups are in the course of peace dialogues where we have very important calling about the fact that any initiative of peace dialogue should set forth a framework and a respect for the work of press. This implies that at a local or at an international level, there has to be flows of and this means they are self-censored. They know much more than what they say, because it's not safe for them to keep on living in that area if they really speak out. This has to do with risk cases. Even though we value the analysis of OLP regarding the denouncements in this entity, there are queries about the timely attention about journalists going to the system of protection for safety in the risk events. And lastly, it is central that the state opens spaces of dialogue with press and organizations representing to be able to speak about guarantees, and something which is no surprise for the present audience here. It was identified by the Commission. There's a hostility climate against press, which includes stigmatizing messages, which may generate permissive spaces to violence. And in that sense, we have to highlight this element and value that the government is available and interested in attending journalists in danger. Now, let's go with the colleague in yellow, the colleague who has just raised his hand by a balance, and somebody else. Rafael Aristizabal from W, talking about increasing violence against press. What do you think of the statements on behalf of the President of Republic, where he says that press is lying and disinforming against his government? Now, second question, as a summary, I think the has the situation of human rights improved or not? From since the last visit, I mean. I'm sorry. Alejandro Hernandez from Noticias Uno. In this moment, we are having dialogue tables making progress. You have made an x-ray of what you saw in the regions and what you spoke with them, but which would be the direct recommendations that you would give to the transit table in this future peace accord on behalf of the national government? Hi. Lucas Reynoso, El País América newspaper. I understand there is no comparison between the implementation of the peace accord in Petro's government and in Duque's government, but you also highlight that you have checked out on improvements in the implementation of this new accord and that there are miscoordinations among government entities. Which would be the balance? Would it be insufficient, negative, positive with regards to the progress made by this new government? Okay, let's start with the first one, Reporter Pedro Vaca. Second one, the question of Elaya with Joint Secretary Maria Claudia Pulido and Commissioner Jimenez. Public officers, particularly the ones who have main character responsibility, also assume a lot of dues and duties in this inter-American system. We have had cases of stigmatization of press. Why is it so important to speak about the inter-American system? It imposes certain obligations. I would like to state three. You expect in a democracy for people who have official voices to corroborate the facts where they join opinions. Secondly, a second task is not disacknowledging the free press, and the third one is not activating risks with people through their expressions, and we should stop there. Official voices are very important, but they also have an important modulation of citizen management of the opinions. These could be understood in a permissive violence. Some journalists did not say that certain appointments in the public became physical, and this may commit responsibilities. Therefore, it is key to move in two senses. Yes, all democracy and their authorities, when we check out violence facts against press, we have to reject them. On behalf of the authorities, we have to investigate them. There should be statements in favor of press in a democratic society. And I would like to recognize that in my experience, we have opening spaces on behalf of institutions to make progress in directives in the prevention of stigmatizations towards press and the deterioration of a public debate. Rapporteur, thank you. Uh, Joint Rapporteur, Maria Claudia Pulido. Thank you for having me in this press conference. Answer this question is very interesting because actually in 12 years, when we didn't have the visit in loco of the commission in an important country like Colombia, we have had several issues and situations. We have a continuous of violence. I would like to highlight the differences. 12 years, it was difficult to talk about truth, memory, justice, reparation. The- in their reports, actually, in the follow up, in the peace accord of 2016, there's institutionality in reparation, memoir, and justice. We also have had a transmutation, a mutation of conflict. 12 years ago, conflict was characterized by political interests, ideologic interests. Nowadays, we cannot say the same. And being in different regions of the country, Commission was in the south border, in the north border, in Antioquia, in communities which are far away. And what characterizes those communities is that the actors of violence today do not have any political or ideological interests, but only economic interests in controlling illegal economies like mining, like drug trafficking, or like human trafficking. It's another conflict, and violence is probably exactly the same. Now, with Commissioner.
Was that there is pressure, an increased pressure in terms of food security. Simple being able to harvest crops and landmines being in the path. So access to water, for example, the continued forced displacement of persons, confinement of communities. So to give you a summary, there is more pressure. But on the other hand, what we have also seen is social leaders, community leaders, traditional leaders saying, we want to participate. We want to have our voice heard in this process. We also want to contribute to the solution. So having gone through those processes, our message is this is a participatory process between the state, social actors, communities, but also the business sector. Thank you.
Gracias. ¿Añade algo más la presidenta?
For the historical inequalities that continue to plague Colombia, and in particular the extreme poverty that is experienced by persons of African descent as well as indigenous populations and persons in the rural communities. We heard that a lot. We also heard about the unequal allocation of resources in this country. A very tiny percentage of people own a vast majority of the productive land. We have been informed. So we have a structural basis of inequality here. What this government has indicated is in its willingness and its commitment to advance human rights, is to advance human rights, not only civil and political rights, participation rights, but also, very importantly, economic, social, and cultural rights. So we understand from their agenda that they will be pursuing a rural reform process, that there's a commitment to education reform, to the extension of universal health care, a pension reform, particularly to address the question of those in the informal sector, also those who are engaged in the care economy who are outside of social security systems. So we see a stated commitment to redressing and redistributing to end inequalities that are territories. And by the way, those territories are also the ones most affected by conflict. So for us at the Commission, what we will be doing is we'll be paying close attention to how these policies are being developed and how they're being monitored. 2 years in, we will continue to look at that, and certainly we will have a chance to comment on the execution of policies to make sure that they are in compliance with our regional human rights standards around economic, social, cultural rights, but also civil and political rights, and importantly, this right to participate, which I think Commissioner Denise spoke about. Participation, constant dialogue, the feedback loop is going to be very important in addressing these historical inequalities. I should just say, we also met with Afro-descendants and indigenous peoples, and one thing they said to us over and over, we feel invisible in this country. We've been talking for decades now about the situation in the countries, in the territories where we live, but things are not changing. Why not? So we also know it's not just a question of state authorities. The whole of Colombian society has to think carefully about the causes of these inequalities and what we can all do, what can be done, or what should be done, what must be done to make sure that every boy, girl, every child has a decent chance to education, to access sanitation, to drink to healthy, clean water, to dignified life, and that we all have that dignified life across, where our basic needs are met across the life cycle.
Muchas gracias. Tenemos la pregunta pendiente de Alejandro sobre las mesas de diálogo y de
Commissioner Caballero so that he can make a combination of these two answers, and then Commissioner Bulkin will conclude. Yes, in the dialogue tables and dialogue groups, I think it is very important. There are some points that the Commission saw and understood. A first scope maybe is a dialogue cannot be away from territories. That means it cannot be a popular dialogue among armed groups and the state without taking into account territories and communities. That's something very important, because it gave the impression that in this dialogue there was a gap, and this gap it's been expressed a lot. It's been said a lot by the community. Some criminal groups demobilize, some other groups arrive because there is a legal economy, etc. But in those tables, in that sense of dialogue, they cannot stop seeing or looking at the territory and the construction, the building of the territories. Today's morning, a quote was said that was very recording on my mind. It's not about taking the state to the territories, but it is about making the state from the territories. And in that sense, it has to be any dialogue table regarding the peace accords. It has to engage relevant social stakeholders. Yes, and I would add that both the implementation of the 2016 peace accords as well as the new peace accords for peace, they have to continue placing the victims in the core of decisions. The thousands of victims that the armed conflicts for the last 60 years have been dragging. They require interventions, engagement, and being in the center of the peace accords. So we will go with the question from El País. First of all, Commissioner Caballero, about whether we are comparing one government with the other, the lack of coordination between local and national central government policies, and then Commissioner Vulcan will conclude. Okay, thank you very much for this question. I would like to refer to the lack of coordination because that's something that we have identified since the beginning and that we have been confirming throughout this week. That means we have found a lack of coordination. I see it this way, like a horizontal lack of coordination in the grounds of correlation between powers and also of autonomous bodies. There's some sort of, it's a fine line, in which there's a lack of a state policy to achieve peace and how a policy by separation of powers, autonomy, they can dedicate to attack other powers. So in the sense of separation among powers and in the sense of equilibrium, balance and counterweights, it's democratic intentionality. But it does not mean that there cannot be a virtuous, harmonious and non-arrogant collaboration in regards to the peace accords and in regards to the rights of people. In that sense, the Colombian state must have a higher view, a higher scope, which goes beyond polarization, political positions, the different differences in powers, and that they can coordinate for the good of people. The other lack of coordination, which is also very important that we noticed, is from the national to, or from a central to the territories, to municipalities and departments. There's a total lack of coordination. You get to the territories and you find that the state is absent because benefits do not arrive, resources do not arrive, guidelines are not arriving, and presence is not arriving. So that, I believe, must be very coordinated. We'll conclude with Commissioner Arif Bulkin.
I know you're pressing us to sort of answer what you see to be a contradiction in what we were saying, but having been and been into these cities in the heartland of where there's the conflict and speaking to community after community, I didn't detect any person or any of the speakers pointing blame at a specific government. It wasn't for them, it wasn't this government is doing this or that government is. For them, it's not a political thing. For them, it's a lived, material, socioeconomic problem. And as President Clark said, it's a situation that's been ongoing. It's a situation of historic inequality. The message from the Commission is that, you know, the finger pointing and the blaming is absolutely not the way to go. That what there needs to be is a commitment to this peace, commitment to the development. And I think that there's this very broad understanding from our interviews and discussions at all levels, municipal, departmental, and with civil society, that this conflict is bred from the inequality. It's the lack of opportunities, and that's what the illegal armed groups are feeding on. And so that the answers that the requests of the communities, which is what we want to portray, the request of the communities is that, one, they must be involved, they must be included. And secondly, that peace is not only about the absence of arms, peace is about development, peace is about opportunity. And that's the message I think Colombia needs to take going forward. As President Clark says, all Colombians must recognize that this has been historic inequality. So not about this government or that government, but what do you want to see going forward? And what you want to see going forward is all Colombians recognizing this historic inequality, and that historic inequality feeding the violence. And by addressing the inequalities, hopefully the idea is that peace is restored. And that's what this commission is about, promoting human rights and peace.
Muchas
To the press that was here, that's here, and that was online. We thank you a lot for your attendance, for your presence, and have a happy Friday.